The goal now is to talk about tuples. So tuples are yet another data structure in Python, and they are very, very similar to lists, but they have some specific use cases. So there are some things you can do with tuples that you cannot do with lists, and vice versa. I think at the moment you will not see the interest of tuples over lists, but this will come later once we see dicts, for instance. Okay, so let's get started. Let's see some example. The first example is the most classical tuple maybe in mathematics, and it's coordinates. So for instance, here I have chords, and I have decided to assign the value 3, 4. So I have just two coordinates, and I can access the first entry or the second, or whatever Python indexing or human indexing you choose. Okay, so this is one way of defining a tuple, but here is another one, omitting the round brackets. So if you put a bunch of stuff and you separate it with commas, and then you assign this, Python will understand that you're trying to make this into a tuple and assign that tuple to the variable named t. So now t is this tuple that consists of a string, a string, a string, and an int. So you see that tuples don't need to have all the entries of the same type, just like lists didn't. Once you have this, then you can access specific entries, right? So like this, and you can use tuple packing extensively. So for instance, here I've decided to pack the tuple that I've already created with this other tuple, and now I have this tuple of nested tuples. Okay, you can also use, so you can use tuple packing, what's called tuple packing on the right of an assignment, but you can also use it on the left. So for instance, now TT is really a tuple with two entries. Well, I can recover those two entries in this way. So this will say, okay, TT is a tuple, and then I have to assign the first entry of the tuple to U and the second entry of the tuple to V. So you can see that U and V are assigned the right values. And if you combine this with tuple packing, this means you can do nice things like this one. So you can assign, you can basically on the right make U comma V into a tuple that you then assign here to AB. So A will be the first entry in this tuple that was implicitly created, and B will be the second entry in this tuple that was implicitly created. So let's see that A, B have exactly the same value as U and V. This is indeed the case. So this means you can also do this swapping in place. So you can make a tuple out of BA and assign it to AB. And this essentially just swaps the value of A and B and is very fast. Okay, so unlike lists, so this seems restrictive compared to lists, tuples are immutable. This means that if you take one of my tuples that I have here, and I decide that I actually want to change the last entry, let's say the last entry, which is 4, to another value, Python is not happy. Python tells me there is a type error because the tuple object here does not support item assignment. Okay, so I'm not allowed to modify actually the entry in the tuple. Once the tuple is created, that tuple is fixed. Now it seems restrictive compared to lists. Why would you ever want to use tuples? Because you can do less with them. Well, they're faster for some types of things, but the fact that you can't change their value means you can do some other things that will enable their use with dicts. Now, tuples are immutable, but they can contain mutable objects like lists, right? So you can start having fun making a tuple here that contains two objects, and those two objects are mutable objects. So it's first the list 1, 2, 3, and then the list 3, 2, 1. So if I ask to print W, I have 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. And then I can access the first object in W, so 1, 2, 3, and modify it. Okay, I cannot assign a different object here, but because this object is a list, I can decide to modify the object, and this is what I do here. So if I ask to print W now, I see that I have indeed modified the first object, the initial object. Now I want to tell you a little bit more about a subtlety in the definition of tuples. So if I want to define an empty tuple, I can do simply this. So it's clear that it will not interact with the rest of the Python syntax, and this should really be a tuple, and that you can call the length on that tuple and get 0. Okay, now what if I want a tuple of length 1? So let's say I try this. You might think this will create a tuple that just contains the int 1, but that's not the case. If I do type 1, so I ask for the type, I get int. Indeed, Python thinks that this is, you're giving me here an expression to evaluate, and you're just bracketing this expression. Okay, so this is not the way to create a tuple of length 1. The right way to do that is to just use the slightly awkward notation 1 comma nothing. So this will print a tuple, this will give a tuple, and you can see that it's printing the same again, and you can also test one tuple for its type, and this is indeed type tuple. Finally, you can ask for the length of one tuple, and that will be 1. Okay, so you see that this is a bit awkward, but this is the way to create a tuple of length 1. That's all I wanted to present for tuples. There are more things you can do with tuples that I won't present now because it looks very similar to the things we could do with lists. For instance, you can do slicing with tuples, just like you do with lists. Okay, so at this stage you might wonder, well, you might think, well, tuples allow me to do some of the things that lists allow me to do, but there are some things I could do with lists that I cannot do anymore with tuples. For instance, assignments. The lists are mutable, but the tuples are immutable. So I'll never use tuples, they're not useful. Well, so far that's actually true, that's actually kind of correct. But once we see dicts, you'll see that there are specific requirements on the keys that are allowed on dicts. And so the dictionaries, the keys that are allowed to be used in the dictionaries. And the tuples satisfy those requirements while the lists don't. So if you want to use a dictionary where the keys have some container type, you're not allowed to use lists, and you will need to use tuples.